In this final video, we're going to discuss the language and notation of integers. So we've discussed this throughout this media lesson, but it's important enough for us to really talk about it again and practice using this language. So in the examples, you're going to need to write this language, but I also highly recommend that when you think about this in your head, or sometimes when you're learning you say things out loud, you practice using the proper language for integers as opposed to operations like addition and subtraction. So if you look at this symbol, in the past you've probably used this symbol to represent addition. So you might look at it and say plus, I think of plus when I see this, or you might look at this and think positive. So in the past it was addition and we would say plus, okay, and it still can mean plus in the right context. But now it can also represent a positive number such as positive 4, which we read this way. So we don't want to read this as plus 4. So let's agree to say the word plus when we mean addition, plus for addition, and positive when we're referring to the sign of a number. And note again, like we've mentioned, we don't always use the positive sign to represent a positive number. In most cases we omit it and we just write 4 instead of positive 4. The next symbol, you may look at this and say minus, or you may look at this and say negative, or now you may look at this and say opposite. So it has 3 different meanings and it depends again on the context. So in the past, you probably use this to represent subtraction. So we might say 4 minus 3. Now it can also mean a negative number such as negative 4, red, negative 4. So notice if you just have the number by itself, there's not an operation of subtraction. We'll talk more about operations in the next few lessons. Indicated here, this is referring to the sign of the number. Or we could say the opposite of a number. So lots of times when we're referring to the opposite, thinking of it as an action, we'll put the number in it itself in parentheses, and then this is read the opposite of 8. So when we see something like this, we could read the opposite of 8. And when we see something like this, we will say negative 8. Now remember, the opposite of 8 is equivalent to negative 8, and you should be able to move in between the 2 different representations and understand their meaning. But for our purposes here, when we see the parentheses, we're going to read it as the opposite. So this is the opposite of negative 5. So remember, the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. So this is a much simpler way of representing this, but we'll see when we're computing later that sometimes you'll have something like this and you'll want to rewrite it. So let's look at some examples. So write the given numbers or mathematical expressions using correct language using the words opposite of, negative, positive, plus, or minus. So let's look at the first one. So this says negative 6, and there's no parentheses around the 6, so I'm just going to write it as negative 6 as opposed to the opposite of 6, even though they're equivalent. Now the next one, we have a negative 6 in parentheses, and we have another symbol on the outside, and we're going to call this the opposite of, since it's outside the parentheses. So this will be the opposite of negative 6. The opposite of negative 6. Oop, my pen isn't working. There we go, negative 6. Now here, notice there's more than one number, and this will get us ready for the next lesson. Here, this symbol is between the numbers negative 3 and 2. So here, this isn't representing a positive 2 for this 2. It's representing the operation of addition, which we're going to perform on the numbers negative 3 and 2. So this reads negative 3, and now we're going to write plus 2. not negative 3, positive 2, because this is representing addition. Now the last one, here this is referring to the sign of the 4. This is a negative 4. Now here we have another symbol that could be opposite, negative or minus, outside, just like we did here. But notice in this case it's between two numbers. So here we have the numbers negative 3 and positive 2. Here we have the numbers positive 3, or just 3, and negative 4. So this is representing the operation of subtraction because it's between the two numbers. So we'll write this as 3 minus negative 4. And we're done.